The heavy oak doors of the convent splinter inward, signaling the end of sanctuary. It is May 6th, 1527, and the sack of Rome has begun. The air chokes with the thick sulfur of arquebuses and the wet wool of the Landsknechte, mercenaries who view this holy city not as a temple, but as a target. Inside, captured nuns are dragged from the altar, their prayers drowned by the grinding of iron boots on marble. A captain snatches a mother-of-pearl rosary from a trembling hand, not to pray, but to test its weight against his palm. This broken strand will recur as our symbol, faith reduced to cold currency. Why did the emperor's own troops turn these consecrated women into items for a mock auction? And what bureaucratic horror did they endure before the sword finally fell? The ledger opens, and the bidding for souls begins. If you enjoy these dark histories, leave a like and subscribe and comment below where you're listening from. And now, back to the story. The spectacle of the breach fades, replaced by the crushing intimacy of the march. The nuns are driven from the sanctuaries of the Trastevere district, pushed over the Ponte Sisto where the Tiber below swirls thick with the bodies of the Swiss guard. The air is heavy with the smell of wet ash and unwashed iron. They are not taken to the city's dungeons. Those are already overflowing with cardinals and nobles, but are herded into the requisitioned palazzos of the fleeing aristocracy. Grand halls, once filled with Renaissance music, are now barracks. The frescoes are blackened by soot from campfires lit directly on the terrazzo floors, and velvet drapes are torn down to wipe the blood from swords. Here, the chaotic violence of the streets settles into a cold, bureaucratic control. The soldiers, a mix of Lutheran Landsknechte and unpaid Spanish infantry, begin the process of inventory. This is not an arrest. It is an acquisition of assets. The women are lined up against walls stripped of their tapestries. A captain with a ledger walks the line, his boots grinding crushed glass into the marble. He does not ask for names. Instead, he assigns values. They are categorized by their order, their age, and the perceived wealth of their convents. A clericin is written down not as a person, but as a potential sum of gold. They are numbered, pointed at with charcoal-stained fingers, and separated into groups based on their marketability. The sacred habit, once a symbol of divine protection, becomes a marker for extortion. Does the ink on the page weigh more than blood? The mercy is offered at sunset. A translator, his voice raspy from the smoke, explains the terms with terrifying politeness. They are to write letters. They must beg their families, their bishops, or the Pope himself for ransom. If the gold arrives, they will be turned out onto the starving streets. If the gold does not arrive, they remain the property of the regiment. It is a choice between destitution and prolonged violation, a psychological vice tightening with every passing hour. The parchment provided is stained with grease. The ink is scarce. Yet, in the suffocating gloom of the makeshift cell, a quiet will to resist surfaces. It is not a resistance of force, they have no weapons, but of interior architecture. One sister, her veil torn away to reveal shorn hair, refuses to look at the guards. She sits with her back perfectly straight against the cold plaster, closing her eyes to the lewd taunts shouted in foreign tongues. She presses a single hidden bead from the broken mother-of-pearl rosary into the palm of her hand, the sharp edge biting into her skin. It is a grounding point. She does not weep. When a soldier commands silence, she continues to move her lips in a soundless rhythm. She is reciting the Psalms, building a cathedral in her mind that their pikes cannot breach. She denies them the satisfaction of her fear, offering only the blank, stone-faced resolve of a statue. Hope is a dangerous thing to keep in a cage. The deadline for the ransom passes in silence. No couriers arrive from the besieged Castel Sant'Angelo. The Pope is a prisoner in his own fortress, and the Vatican's coffers are empty. With the prospect of gold vanishing, the captors shift their focus from extortion to ideology. The Lutheran Landsknechte, fueled by religious fervor and weeks of looting, decide to stage a theater of the absurd. This is the condition stated openly. The nuns must renounce their papist idolatry and participate in the mock liturgies held by the drunken soldiery, or they will face the consequences of being declared enemies of the true faith. The soldiers drag the women into a courtyard littered with broken statuary. They have draped themselves in stolen chasubles, wearing cardinals' hats askew, drinking unwatered wine from consecrated chalices. They demand the sisters join this grotesque carnival. A captain, his breath sour with onions and rot, thrusts a stolen mitre onto the head of an elderly abbess. He commands her to bless the troops, to invert her vows, and praise the destruction of her own city. The air is thick with the smoke of roasting meat, a cruel sensory assault on women who have been given nothing but stale crusts for days. The pressure escalates. When the women refuse to sing the bawdy tavern songs demanded of them, the food stops entirely. The water buckets are kicked over. The soldiers expect panic. They expect the soft, sheltered women of the cloister to break under the weight of biological necessity. They wait for the weeping, for the begging, for the surrender of dignity in exchange for a cup of muddy water from the Tiber. But the captors have miscalculated the nature of their prisoners. They see weak women. They do not see veterans of the spirit. Can the body be broken if the mind has already left it? One younger nun is singled out. A soldier holds a piece of meat in front of her, dripping grease onto the dust, demanding she curse the Pope to eat. She looks at the food, then up at his face, her expression void of the fear he craves. Her refusal is not a scream, but a flat statement of fact. I am already full. It is a lie of the body, but a truth of the will. The deprivation intended to destroy them becomes their armor. For years, these women have practiced fasting as a path to holiness. They have taken vows of silence that turned quiet rooms into sanctuaries. Now, they weaponize that discipline. The hunger that gnaws at their bellies is familiar territory. They know how to navigate the landscape of starvation better than the men taunting them know the streets of Rome. The dark, damp cellars where they are thrown become new cells for contemplation. The enforced silence becomes a rule they follow more strictly than their jailers can enforce. The soldiers become agitated. The why of this torture, to extract wealth or amusement, dissolves into a frustrated confusion. The price of the nuns' survival was supposed to be their souls, but they have locked those away where no sword can reach. The silence of the captives begins to unnerve the guards. It is not the silence of submission, but of judgment. The Landsknechte, superstitious and far from home, begin to see the unblinking stares of the starving women not as weakness, but as a curse. The mockery dies down, replaced by a sullen, dangerous resentment. The fun is over. The transaction has failed. What happens when the toy refuses to play? The end of their captivity is not brought by a rescue party from the Vatican, but by the invisible conqueror that eventually claims all armies, the plague. By midsummer, the stench of the dead in Rome's streets is so overpowering that the birds stop circling. The Landsknechte, once invincible in their looting, begin to rot from the inside out. Terrified of the bad air and superstitious that their captives have cursed them, the soldiers make a pragmatic, brutal decision. They do not waste powder or steel on the women. Instead, they choose erasure. The heavy wooden doors of the cellar are not opened to release them. They are reinforced. Iron spikes are driven into the frame, sealing the gap between the oak and the stone archway. The sound of the hammer striking iron rings through the damp space, a final percussive sentence. The light from the crack under the door is extinguished with a shovelful of wet earth. The screams from inside, if there were any, are swallowed by the thick masonry of the palazzo. The soldiers march away to die in the open air, leaving the women to the suffocating dark. A door locked from the outside is a tomb in waiting. In this total blackness, a transformation occurs. The historical record usually ends here at the point of disappearance, but forensic evidence suggests what happened in the final hours. Deprived of sight, the women revert to the tactile certainty of their order. They do not descend into the animal panic their captors expected. Instead, they enact a final, wordless rite. They cannot offer mass, but they can offer order. They lay themselves down. This is not a chaotic pile of bodies in a corner. It is a calculated formation. They arrange themselves in rows on the damp earth floor, mimicking the choir stalls of their lost convent. The mother-of-pearl rosary, the symbol of their captured faith, is not discarded. In the dark, the string is snapped. The sound is a sharp crack, like a knuckle breaking. The beads are distributed. It is a communion of calcium and sweat. Each sister takes a single bead, pressing it into her palm or placing it on her tongue, a final, solid anchor in a dissolving world. They compose their limbs while they still have the strength, crossing their hands over their chests. They deny the chaos of the sack the power to dictate their posture in death. They choose to die as nuns, not as prisoners. The truth of this final act remains buried for centuries, hidden beneath the rebuilt foundations of Rome. It is only when archives from the confraternity of the oration and death, a brotherhood dedicated to burying the abandoned dead, are cross-referenced with modern excavation notes that the picture clears. During renovations of Roman palazzos in the subsequent decades, workmen would occasionally break through false walls to find rooms of bones. The records are sparse, written in dry clerical Latin, but one detail stands out. The skeletons were not found in the twisted contortions of agony or conflict. They were found supine, orderly, facing east. And in the dust beneath the ribs of nearly every set of remains, excavation logs note the presence of a small, lustrous sphere. They swallowed the evidence of their identity to keep it from the thieves. The silence of the cellar preserved what the noise of the city tried to destroy. What is buried deep enough becomes the foundation. The smoke clears, but the silence endures. In the years following 1527, Rome frantically rebuilds. The blackened walls are whitewashed. The blood is scrubbed from the terrazzo with lye and vinegar. The city, desperate to forget its humiliation, engages in a conspiracy of erasure. The convent is repopulated with new novices from Florence who are told not to ask about their predecessors. The captain's ledger, that book of cold arithmetic used to value souls in Act 1, becomes ash in a campfire during the imperial retreat. The names written inside it, Maria, Julia, Elena, dissolve into the anonymity of the fallen. There are no trials for the murderers. The Landsknechte melt back into the German hinterlands or die of syphilis in roadside ditches, their pockets empty of the gold they killed for. The transaction initiated at the altar never closes. The debt remains unpaid. But the building remembers. For centuries, the palazzo stands as a reliquary disguised as a residence. Servants whisper of a cellar door that must never be opened, not because of ghosts, but because the air near the brickwork feels heavy, pressurized by a held breath. The mercy of the outside world was to forget them, but their refusal to be forgotten is written in the architecture itself. When the physical barrier is finally breached, perhaps by a bomb during the next Great War or a simple renovation, the loop closes. The light returns to the dark. It reveals the final answer to the captain's question of value. He saw the mother-of-pearl rosary as loot. They saw it as a map. By consuming the beads, they turned their own bodies into the reliquaries the soldiers had smashed. The flesh has gone to dust. The habits have rotted to threads. But the hard, white evidence of their prayer remains nested in the dirt. The violence of the sack could strip them of their lives, but it could not pry the symbol of their vows from their grip. They did not vanish. They waited. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like. Does history haunt us, or do we haunt it?